Can I pass and come back? I'm reviewing something now.
The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for appearing. I don't think we can overstate the value of confidence in our system going forward. As a matter of fact, we want to make sure that we have confidence in our system at all times, and probably our system has functioned as well as it has, especially the FDIC insured system, because there is confidence in the system. Confidence is really a cornerstone of the system. And as we move forward, the question really isn't whether a large institution that poses systemic risk should be allowed to fail if it's not properly managed. The question is, how do you allow that to happen? And they should. How do you allow that to happen and not create systemic risk? How do you allow it to happen and not have public confidence become a part of a crisis, such that the public responds? If you're talking about banks, the public will respond by demanding the deposits. And when that happens, you have what's known as a run. And with a run, we find that the institutions themselves become at risk. There is a broader problem that we're trying to resolve, not the institution that's failing, but more of how does that happen without causing other institutions to become a part of the failure that's developing. So with this said, I'd like to start with Mr. Geithner. This plan that has been proposed to allow these institutions to fail, too big to fail, right size to regulate, separate, eliminate, this plan to do this, if the plan were in place, how would it have impacted a facility, an institution like Lehman's, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrett. The gentleman from Texas,
Mr. Chairman,
Green.
Bernanke, if you would respond as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, sir, for appearing today. You indicated that, I'm saying approximately, I think you used the number of $50 billion was off the balance sheets. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it also true that there was a company that received these off-balance sheets books? Is that a way to put it? Was there a business made up of former Lehman employees that received these investments?
Not to my knowledge.
Right. No reports of that?
Let me double check for a second. I'm not aware of any.
You indicated that the disclosures were incorrect and misleading. Is this true?
Yes.
Who does your report go to when you're finished, completely finished? While this is not on all fours with the Madoff case, there are some similarities. You have a whistleblower, you have the appearance of assets that do not exist, and my concern is that no one to date has been arrested. No one has been charged. Are these fair statements to the best of your knowledge?
I'm not aware of anybody being charged here.
And the concern really is this: how can this kind of thing, and you're not qualified to answer, but how can this go on and no one suffer some sort of criminal investigation to the extent that the public is aware of it? This is just amazing. When I read this information, I was thunderstruck, because I couldn't believe that all of this information is available and we haven't seen anyone arrested. The public at some point has got to see some sort of effort to bring to justice people who do this and take advantage of so many others with these misleading and incorrect documents. You don't say that they were intentionally done, but it concerns me that we have all of this information and we don't have the criminal investigation that I'm aware of either taking place, such that at some point we would know whether or not a crime was committed, I suppose. There is no indication so far of a crime, but if this isn't fraud, it will do until fraud shows up. It's about as close as you can get to fraud if it isn't fraud and not have fraud. It really is quite disconcerting to see this kind of thing happen and not see the investigation. But I thank you for what you've done to help us at least get some insight as to what was going on there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the Secretary for appearing. Good afternoon. Let's talk about, for just a moment, the alternative. We have a proposal. Can you explain to us what the alternative is? It seems as though there's a notion that there is something much, much better that we could be doing if we would but only do that, something that's much, much better. What are the alternatives? If we don't increase capital requirements, what's the alternative? Now, what you're attempting to do, and we are attempting to do, is to make this as global as possible. Would you please address the transparency necessary to implement this in a global market? And finally, the definition of a bank, that will be universal, such that we won't have some country that concludes that these institutions, while they look like banks and they lend like banks, they're really not banks. I thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing alternatives from those who contend
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for appearing.
And I thank you for the time,
Mr. Chairman,
you're back.
it's very difficult to be poor. It's very expensive to be poor. In poor neighborhoods, goods cost more. In poor neighborhoods, you find that unemployment is obviously higher for any number of reasons. It's very difficult to be poor. And when you're poor and you need a job, and it's difficult to get a job because of credit scores, it seems that we compound the problem. I'm very concerned about how we approach credit scoring with reference to employing people, especially people who are poor. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses, and I look forward to solutions such that poor people won't find that they're being invidiously discriminated against.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the
Mr.
balance of my
Chairman,
time.
I'd like to ask all of the witnesses a question, and the question is, was it appropriate and necessary for the government to intercede with the $700 billion bailout? If you don't think so, and you think that we should have done nothing, would you just simply raise your hand? I'm going to take it from the absence of hands that there's a belief among the witnesses that there was a need for a bailout. That's the terminology that we're using nowadays, so I'll be consistent so that we can communicate. Mr. Reed, I believe it is, sir, you indicated that there's enough incentive to, I believe you said, to do the right thing for your customers. Maybe it's not Reed. Is it Hyde, excuse me. Mr. Hyde, is there enough incentive for you to do the right thing for the economy?
I guess the way I think of it is that if we do right with our customers, we are doing what's right for the economy.
And if you find that it is not necessary to make modifications and you have customers who go into foreclosure and that impacts the economy in an adverse way, have you done the right thing?
I think the fact that we've done a substantial number of loan modifications, the fact that we've done a substantial number of principal forgiveness loan modifications, I think says that we're doing everything we possibly can to stabilize.
What percentage would you consider substantial?
In the course of, answered it a different way, about 2% of the overall portfolio on an annual basis is what ultimately works its way through foreclosure.
Have you reached the 2% plateau?
It's been pretty consistent between somewhere on an annual basis.
2% of those in foreclosure?
2% of the entire portfolio of Americans that have homes tends to go through the foreclosure
No,
process.
I understand, but what percentage of your homes that are in foreclosure have you modified?
A couple ways to answer that. If you look at the
I would like, if no disrespect, and time is of the essence, I'd like for you to give a percentage, if you would, of the many ways.
I don't have the specific answer to your specific question. I don't have an answer to that right now.
I think most who examine these numbers have concluded that we have not significantly impacted the number of homes in foreclosure. Do you agree with this contention?
No.
Do you think that you've significantly impacted? Well, if you have, it would seem to me that you would be prepared to talk to us about how you have performed this significant feat.
So let me answer it this way. Certainly, there's no question more needs to be done. When I look at
Sir, more needs to be done? You say it as though if we do something else, we'll make a great difference. A lot more appears to me should be done because we're facing a lot more foreclosures. What are we going to do about them? Let me just excuse myself from you for just a moment, if I may, please. And no disrespect to you, but I do have to go to Bank of America. Let me compliment you on this principal reduction program. I think that when businesses do well, we have to acknowledge it. And you should be complimented for what you've done.
Thank you.
There'll be no demonstrations.
Tell us briefly why you see principal reduction, as tersely as you can, as a significant means by which we can impact foreclosures. Let me move one step further because I'm about to lose my time. Would this also impact the overall economy, what you're doing? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The
gentleman
gentleman
from
from
Illinois.
Texas, Mr. Green, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Bernanke, for appearing today. I'd also like to take a moment, if I may, and thank Bank of America. If what I'm reading in the newspaper is correct, I'd like to thank them for producing a principal reduction program. And I'm referencing this because we have not yet resolved the question of foreclosures. It's a serious question, and it's one that I think we have to get a handle on before we can conclude that we're out of the woods, to borrow a phrase. My question, Mr. Bernanke, is this: how important is it for us to resolve the question of foreclosures, that just the unusual number that actually have now gone into persons who are not blessed with or cursed with, depending on how you look at it, with adjustable rate mortgages? We have persons now who clearly qualified for the mortgages that they have, but their homes are now underwater. So how important is it for us to get a handle on this to avoid a double dip recession? Mr. Chairman, you said you encourage, and I'm going to ask, are you permitted to encourage other institutions comparable to B of A, to do a similar thing? And I ask because I'm not sure what the protocols are with reference to your office. I know that you try as best as you can to make sure that you don't encroach upon the province of Congress and others, but are you permitted to, and can you encourage other institutions to take similar action? Well, thank you. And I will say this: I think that we will do what we can, and we should. But I would also hope that other institutions will, of their own volition, decide that they too have a role to play in this. This is why I compliment B of A, because they, of their own volition, it appears, unless there's something going on that I'm not privy to, they've decided to engage in principal reduction. Reducing interest rates, that's a great thing to do, and I think that can be helpful, but principal reduction based upon payments made is an inducement to the person to keep your home and also know that you will not be underwater perhaps at some point in the future. Thank you for your comments, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. His time has expired. I would remind him that that's a bank that's based in my congressional district. Maybe there's some causal connection.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I know that good things happen whenever you show up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having been here, Mr. Chairman, when the request was made for a toxic assets program to be implemented, and having seen the capital purchase program implemented, I do have some degree of institutional knowledge in terms of what actually occurred. And my hope is that we can get beyond the finger pointing, but my sincerest thought is that we will not. Hence, the truth has to be told. And it is only by telling the truth that we will make it clear to future generations what exactly occurred. 2 points. One, we do have to concern ourselves with what we call moral hazard, but we also have to concern ourselves with the immoral hazard. The moral hazard has to do with the possibility of persons taking advantage of a program specifically designed to help persons in times of need. The immoral hazard has to do with doing nothing after having seen millions, more than 6, go into foreclosure. Do nothing and watch millions more go into foreclosure. That's an immoral hazard. We have a great challenge before us. If we do nothing, the impact on the economy can be devastating. If we do nothing, the moral hazard will be secondary to the immoral hazard of having done nothing at a time when we are called upon to do much. I think we have to simply understand that we are here for a purpose. We are here to make sure that moral hazards are avoided and to make sure that we don't engage in the immoral hazard of doing nothing.
Thank you, Chair.
I'll yield back
Mr.
the
Green,
balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do believe that fraud is important because I think the American public would like to know if fraud was committed. And Mr. Black, you've indicated that you think fraud was committed. Is this with reference to the repo 105s?
That's one of the
That's the one
frauds.
I'd like to focus on.
Certainly.
Explain to us how you contend that fraud was committed with the repo 105s. And are you of the opinion that this was committed at Lehman's with the 105s?
Repeatedly.
I'll come back to you if time permits. I'd like to go to Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, you indicated that you delivered a message, hand-carried a codified message. You didn't say exactly what it was. Are you indicating to us that you were trying to tell the auditors that something improprietous was taking place?
And as I said...
Let's talk just for a moment about the content. Were you trying to indicate that something improprietous was taking place?
In my mind, yes.
And were you trying to indicate that this act could be harmful to investors?
That was underlying it, yes.
Did you ever have an opportunity to communicate this?
What does this mean?
The fact that there was something improprietous taking place that may be harmful to investors with reference to repo 105s.
I only...
Excuse me, I'd like to know how they became well known. Did you tell some specific person, or did you give it to someone in writing, that these repo 105s were in some way improprietous and may harm at some point investors?
At only one stage did I put it in writing, but for months, years, it was...
Is your answer yes, that you did convey this?
Yes, I did.
And did you convey this to the audit committee?
I have never attended any audit committee at
Did you
Lehman Brothers.
convey it to an auditor?
I did, two.
To two auditors? Did you receive a response with reference to what you conveyed?
No, I did not.
There was simply nothing said to you after you passed this on?
There was just acknowledgement that they knew about the issue. As I said earlier, they didn't know the amount, I don't think.
Now, you've heard Mr. Black. He has used the term fraud. Are you of the opinion that there was fraud?
I'm not a lawyer, I can't comment.
I'll accept your answer. Mr. Black, I do have enough time to come back to you. In your opinion, based on what you've said, it seems that you think that there was not only fraud in a civil sense, but also fraud in a penal sense. Is this a correct statement? Have you conveyed what you're sharing with us and perhaps other information to some authority that has the authority to investigate fraud?
If you're familiar with my writings, I do this on a weekly basis.
Well, I'd like it for the record. We have a record that we're trying to establish.
Right. It's in my prepared testimony.
Is your answer
submitted.
yes?
Yes.
And have you received a response with reference to what you call to the attention of these authorities?
The SEC has never contacted me about any of the things I've attempted to alert the SEC about.
My final question to you will be simply this. Name the authorities that you took evidence of fraud to. If you just write and publish it in the newspaper, how are you to assume that the proper authorities will know? I'm sure that everybody reads your writings, but maybe someone might miss it who's in a position to do something. I'll have to relinquish my time now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Wilson for 5 minutes.